Yes, people jump on. Maybe tell us a little bit about your background for people who don't know.
Oh, sorry, lost
No
video
worries.
there. Yeah, so for people who don't know me, I'm a systems theorist, investigative journalist, have a background in international security, got really interested in systems thinking and trying to understand the kind of huge intersection of ecological, energy, environmental, crises and the way that these are influenced by our values and our worldview. So I started doing a lot of work in that space, and I think you and I, Daniel, came across each other at some point during that point, and I remember us sharing notes, meeting quite a few times, um, and I think since then, my I've kind of been straddling these two realms of trying to work in the systems change space and thinking a lot about where we go from here as a civilization, which I know you're also doing a lot of that, Daniel. Um, and also doing investigations. Like a few years ago, I actually decided that I'm too traumatized by the investigative work that I was doing. I was tracking a lot of far right groups and extremist organizations, and I just was looking at the impact of that, and I was thinking, I don't know where I'm going with this. I really want to focus more on the future and how we get to a better space. I don't know whether I'm having a good enough impact by exposing these stories. So I tried to move away from that. Um, and I don't know what happened last year. I wrote an article about a guy called Michael Gove, who is he was a senior minister in the cabinet in the previous conservative government. And Michael Gove basically came out and said all this stuff about extremism, and we need a new extremism definition. And it's crazy because he's like a really properly like anti-Muslim, has said crazy things about black people in the past, has toyed with eugenics ideology, which we can come back to later. But really kind of interesting individual, but definitely extreme. So I wrote a piece about him, drawing on all the work that I'd done, saying this guy is Michael Gove, the extremist. It went viral, and when my wife said to me, Nafeez, you need to take all that stuff that you've done and piece it together because people don't know about all this. They don't know what's going on. They don't know who these people are. So she convinced me to write a book. So I spent the next 6 months putting together this book, and then it came out at the end of last year, and it's called Alt-Right. That's the last kind of major kind of investigative project I've done. And alt-right is of course a play on the term alt-right, the alternative right. But I guess my subtitle of my book is "The Network War to Destroy the West from Within." And I think I'll say what I was shocked at by putting this book together is, even when I was investigating these groups before, I didn't really see the connections as clearly as I did when I actually wrote it all together, like put it together as a chronology. And then it became really clear that there's been a deliberate effort by some groups to literally tear down the foundations of democracy from inside. And I would hesitate to say that there is one overarching kind of plan. There isn't. There's a multiplicity of these plans. But one of the plans that is becoming really prominent is being spearheaded by this kind of technology oligarchy. And those guys seem to be really clear about their contempt for democracy. And of course, there are real problems with democracy. But I think the failings of the kind of orthodox liberal paradigm have allowed these guys to come in, exploit those sentiments and many legitimate grievances, but direct them into a direction with most people have no idea where these guys are going. And where these guys are going is pretty damn dangerous.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're all becoming aware. I mean, I've been writing about the technocracy movement that Musk's grandfather was part of back in the 40s. Then he got inspired by apartheid and decided it was a good idea to be part of that. Um, yeah, I mean, I've also been, if you look at the Heritage Foundation, which created Project 2025, I mean, just last night I was talking about it with a friend, and I think they're, they have like $300 million, budget, revenue, whatever. It's just enormous. And then you look at the top corporate donors to heritage, and it's Coors, Exxon, Walmart, Coca-Cola. I think, not sure about Coca-Cola, but definitely the other ones. So essentially, it's like yeah, it's like a corporate takeover. And while it's very clear that the U.S. has long, or maybe since its origins, even been kind of like an oligarchy and a sort of pretend democracy, for whatever reasons, in this new kind of instantiation, it feels that all the pretenses of democratic participation are going to be thrown away. And what we're seeing with the kind of integration of technology and government is, yeah, a new model, which is basically a technocratic model, where government services will be replaced by kind of AI, blockchain based kind of like apparatuses, And yeah, I think it's going to be really, really incredibly funky, terrible for humanity. And so I think we're in a bit of a race against time personally, because what's looming on the horizon, like if you watch the speeches of the leaders of the AI world, like Sam Altman and Dario Amodei from Anthropic, they're basically saying we're 3 to 5 years out from artificial general intelligence. And basically already artificial intelligence is very fucking smart. So like yeah, I've been playing with Claude recently and chat. But the point is that they think that within 3 to 5 years, most jobs will be eliminated. Certainly all the cognitive labor jobs. And then, as AI evolves so that, it starts to, you have AI augmented, robots, building AI augmented robots, then you're in a takeoff point where most human beings have no role in the system that they're imagining. So I feel that what we need to do right now is build a movement around raising the awareness among the populace around this AI techno-fascist future, and stop it. And I think this is what's good about this as a because it's like, in a way, and I'm sorry, I'm talking a little bit, but you seem interested, so I'll keep going for a bit. What's good about this threshold and this juncture is like it's never been so clear, and also it's like a huge power overreach. So while you do have this global oligarchic mafia, you also have many, many people who are not on board, and some of them have resources, some of them, a lot of them are, have knowledge and resource capital. Um, so I think there's the potential to actually build a much broader based movement, um, working with cognitive laborers, knowledge workers, and then also like, laborers, working class people, farmers in the global south and so on. Um, the question is how to build such a movement at the speed with which we need to build it before this thing just becomes kind of indestructible, because they're also building their drones and robots and all that stuff. So anyway, that's my thinking for my happy thoughts for this morning. Where I don't know where that takes you, but
Happy thoughts. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. You've painted a picture which fits exactly, I think, what a lot of these guys are thinking. So I don't know if your listeners are. I mean, and I'm pretty sure You've been writing about some of these weird ideas, like the Dark Enlightenment, right?
yes.
So
Well,
so a lot of your.
I even interviewed Curtis Yarvin recently. I met him at this conference in Miami.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, it's on YouTube. And
Oh, wow. I missed
yeah,
that.
yeah. So I mean, it's like, yeah, on a person to person level, he was fine. I kind of liked him. He feels like a weird intellectual nerd who got interested in like weird ideas, and maybe has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, but he's got a very convoluted rhetorical style. What I've discovered with these guys. It's like they basically, it doesn't matter how much time and space you give them in terms of a conversation, they will sort of aggregate all of it in these sort of convoluted rhetorics and never really get to the actual point of what they're actually advocating. And yeah, and what he's advocating is insanity, as far as I'm concerned. So you're going to have like He wants an absolute dictatorship of a tech CEO. And I'm like, Curtis, like, what if the guy decides he doesn't like you? He could just like put you in chains and torture you and carry you off. Maybe, it's like, why would you want this? It's a kind of, I guess these people feel that if they're advocating for it, they'll be the beneficiaries of it. They'll be in the top ruling echelon and carried up into that. I don't really understand it because for me, we did a lot of work to overthrow, kings and dictators, and it's quite surprising that there's such enthusiasm to do this when we've seen it fail over and over again. And also, I mean, there's the kind of intricate fusion of the sort of libertarianism, which should be about like decentralized control, like they're all talking about like a network states and seasteading, like having your own little private city state where you're as the feudal lord who define, and then but at the same time they want to integrate that now with complete kind of like centralized control.
Yeah,
Um,
I think what's really interesting about this is the way in which if you go back over the last 15 years, there's been like this radicalization process, right? And I think what's happened is, like, I think you've got this system of predatory capitalism, which has been rumbling along, and it's creating a civilizational crisis. I think what's happened is a lot of people in this elite networks have been looking at this crisis and wondering what to do about it. And there's been increasingly a rift. So there's a bunch of people, I think, who are kind of more on the Bill Gates, George Soros end, who are kind of like, you keep the system going, make class concessions, maybe sort out some issues around identity politics, keep them, give concessions to the masses. Yeah, maybe inequality, that could be a problem for the system. We should deal with that. How do we deal with it? Oh, maybe we give a few rights here and there. So those guys are like tinkering with the system, but that doesn't work. And I think what's happened is these guys are tinkering. The system's got worse. We've got inflationary crisis and getting deepening. You've got ecological crisis worsening. There's a looming energy crisis with the fossil fuel system, which is not only driving the climate change crisis, but behind the scenes, the energy return on investment is hemorrhaging. Was the biggest untold stories of this system, which is behind everything, is energy, right? And the fact is that there's a consensus in the field that the amount of energy that we're putting in to get the amount of energy out that's going up, and that returns are diminishing, and it's hemorrhaged like by around half over the last 50 to 60 years, and it's only going down. That's helping the prices go up. It's creating this inflationary crisis. And then the system is rigged, right? Because the fossil fuel companies, they've been lobbying for years. They've got their paws in all of the different structures and institutions of power. And when the prices are high, who makes money? Because of the way the market works, the market doesn't recognize reality. It just says, oh, the prices are up. Where should we invest? Oh, let's invest in oil and gas because that's where the money is. And so it's kind of like this terrible kind of racket. Um, so I think what's happening is these guys are looking at this, and and then there's been in the run up to 2016 with the rise of the Trump administration, and since then that has created like I call it like a rupture in the deep state, right? So it's not like, oh, there's here's the establishment, and that's the deep state, and then these guys are outside. So you map out exactly as you said, who are these people? Who are the people backing Trump, behind Trump? These people are not radicals or outside the establishment. They've been in the establishment for decades, but they're a cross section of the establishment, and they've kind of coalesced around these weird ideas. And what's interesting is like, so people like Curtis Yarvin, who was writing for some time, writing for years, wasn't really getting picked up in the mainstream. Who was reading him? People like Peter Thiel, people like JD Vance, people like Elon Musk, other people in this technology oligarchy were reading him, and they were thinking, oh, this makes sense. Actually, that makes sense. Democracy is itself is the problem. So what's happened here is now we've got this weird situation, and I think you guys saw. And I remember you writing about this, where the Biden-Harris team came across like the status quo option. Like they looked like, oh, we're the establishment option. And the Trump guys and all these guys presented themselves as we're the disruptors. We're coming in from outside and we're going to tear everything down. And that sounded to a lot of ordinary folks, living from paycheck to paycheck. They can't see an opportunity, and all of the stuff that Biden Harris was doing, even though there were definitely some good things that they were doing, but the fundamental dynamics is this: people weren't seeing the benefits. There's so many entrenched problems with capitalism that aren't being dealt with. People aren't feeling the benefits of those things, right? So when these guys come in and say, you know what, we're just gonna tear everything down. It's all shit. Let's just tear everything down. That feels appealing for a lot of people. They're like, actually, yeah, tear it all down. You're feeling so disillusioned and apathetic and kind of marginalized that you just think, actually, yeah, just do it. And obviously, then you combine that with digital media, disinformation, collapsing people's ability to think, and it's kind of become this maelstrom. So I think you're right. There's this. I think what I'm really worried about is the fact is that, as you said, a lot of these guys have bought it. Like, if you look at some of the things that these guys are doing, that it's like they literally read Curtis Yarvin's blogs over the last 10 years and they said, you know what, let's just do all of that. Like 10 years ago, he was talking about rage, retire all government employees. And that's what they're doing now. Let's just gut the federal government completely. And, people who are looking at this, they're looking at it in detail and they're saying, wait a minute, are they actually dealing with corruption? Are they actually eliminating waste? Are they actually eliminating fraud? No clear evidence of that. Instead, Musk is busy raking in contracts for himself, meanwhile eliminating all these other things, removing checks and balances. So I think that's the thing, right? Obviously, something needed to change. The system is broken. But these guys don't want to fix the system. They're worried about the system unraveling. They're worried about the prospect of a popular uprising. And I think what these guys are trying to do is hedge that off as fast as they can by really leveraging all of their power, all of their muscle to really shore up these kind of new techno oligarchic structures and centralize power even more than it already is. And that's what one of the things that they've been very explicit about. If you're looking at the books that they're reading, stuff that they're reading is democracy is the problem, and national sovereignty is the problem. Let's smash all of these and create these mini, Curtis Yarvin calls it a patchwork of these mini sovereign states. So I think you're right. What we need to do is it's absolutely imperative that those of us who can see this, I think we need to start being more connected. We need to start reaching back out to each other and recreating those connections, rekindling old friendships, creating new friendships, creating new lines of communication so that we can begin to create more awareness of what is going on, almost like a kind of a new grassroots collective intelligence, where we're able to communicate with each other and sense make about what is happening. And I don't think we're going to have the answers just like that, but I think that first step is how do we build some cognitive clarity amongst those of us who are really seeing this. And as we start to build that cognitive clarity, let's work together to see how can we really scale that sense of clarity to help other people begin to see, wait a minute, this is going wrong. The one thing I would say, which is that, and one thing I would say is that these guys are not indestructible because when you're looking from a systems point of view at the dynamics, and I think you do see this as well. The problem is they're not indestructible because the system that they're building is fundamentally at odds with the planet. It is gonna this is the route to accelerated collapse, probably within this century. So if they build this technological oligarchy, whatever they're doing, and then do all this stuff, the danger is that they will accelerate an ecological energy collapse that will drive all sorts of social and political extremism and collapse. What I think is what I'm hopeful about is that in the coming years, as we see these guys tear stuff down, it will become clearer and clearer that what they're doing is not actually working, that it's completely mad, it's insane. they're not actually going to improve the lives of Americans. They're going to make the lives of Americans much, much worse. The danger is that as people's minds get completely fucked, they can't see it and they start gravitating more to kind of extremism and divisive ideologies that these guys weaponize. So I think there's this kind of liminal space that's beginning to open up where, as these guys tear everything down and make things kind of really, I mean, Cory Doctorow calls it like the edgetification, and I think he's right. I think there is going to be an appetite for alternatives, and people are going to be looking at okay, so what else do we do? And that's, I think, what we need to think about in terms of movement building. How do we make sure that when people start looking around for those answers, instead of gravitating to the next white supremacist, neo-Nazi kind of masquerading person, instead they pick up some really interesting and exciting visions about what's possible. You know, that's what I think we really need to think about how to do that.
There's so much there that I wanted to unpack and ask about and talk about. Um, yeah, I mean, I think one element of it, which I thought about when I wrote a book in 2016 called How Soon Is Now, which I think you've written sort of similar books where we're like, well, actually, guys, like we could redesign our, infrastructure and, not go into tailspin and actually have like a better system for everybody and so on. Here would be a bunch of ways to do that. But, in that book, I was also thinking about how, yeah, like, the sort of you know, governance system of the nation state, which was 18th century political technology, is in a way kind of outmoded and obsolete. And it is kind of true that a dictator like Putin has been much, with much less resources, has been like 100x more effective than the U.S. government with its separation of powers, because new technology comes along like deep fakes or algorithmic capture on social media. He's just, oh hey, hackers, go do it, go get them. Whereas everything in our system seems to be caught in this kind of bureaucratic morass, and then an initiative starts. Then 4 years later, the next administration comes in, they undo the initiatives of the last one. Or there's a popular vote on like something like Brexit, and then the whole system is like thrown as fucked and so on. So yeah, it did sort of feel. I mean, the Democrats were, yeah, there were a few good things that Biden did. I like the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, there was some effort to create more worker protections, but it still just seemed everything seems stuck in this kind of like institutional cotton wool, and this kind of like, and there's hardly anybody in the Democratic Party who's worth, who's like a live player right now, where you're like, oh, cool, like that person, I can't wait to hear what they have to say next. They're still not very, they're not responding, spontaneously to what's happening in a moment by moment, grab the moment kind of way, the way the Republicans have and do. So yeah, so in a way, like I don't personally think, and I'd be happy to be proved wrong. I don't think that the US is going to go back to the old constitutional
No.
system. I think that that system is done. So now we actually are in a revolutionary moment, and also kind of like a free fall, from the rule of law, which is, and it's kind of insane for these tech oligarch guys, because, Thiel is worth 80 billion, Musk is worth 200 billion. Like, they were set for life. They could have private islands. They could have their supermodels. They could have everything, they needed, their private security. Um, in a way, they like, it's like they're gamblers. I mean, I think in a way it's like dopamine, where like it wasn't enough just to have that. If you could actually, because it's annoying when you have so much power, but then the government wants to regulate you, and how dare they? So why not just go in and take the fucking thing over from the inside, and then have procurement capture, so you decide where the money goes, or even how to make the money, right? Like he's taking over the treasury system and so on. So, and I guess, we know that absolute power corrupts absolutely, but I definitely feel like we're in kind of like, feels like a Greek tragedy in a way, like come to life, or a Shakespearean kind of like drama in a way. Um, but yeah, so for whatever reasons, and another, I mean, I've looked at it from different angles in my efforts to try to understand, it may also be that they felt in some ways their ultimate power base was actually quite fragile. because China has kind of started to outcompete the U.S. technologically. So for instance, BYD, which is the Chinese car company, apparently makes much better, much cheaper electric cars for like 10, 11,000 that you can't even buy in the US, but they're like, all over the world, people are buying them. TikTok, has outcompeted, Facebook, and then DeepSeek, outcompeted, Chat GPT and so on. So I think these guys may have actually felt that their power base was quite fragile. And given this opportunity to, because they were all Democrats like 6 years ago, they sort of took this opportunity to go for an all or nothing kind of thing. And yeah, I mean Biden, under Lena Khan, the whole idea was to break up the tech monopolies, kind of like for the good of the tech sector, because when you have these monopolies, they restrict innovation because there's no competition. And so like Facebook and Instagram are just kind of like stuck platforms. Like there's no exciting new anything really happening there. I mean, Zuckerberg's attempt to spend trillions of dollars in the metaverse thing was a total catastrophe. So it's like um, yeah, so they could have, agreed to have limits imposed on their power, have those tech monopolies broken up, allow for more competition and more innovation. But instead, in their hubris, they decided to double down on, control. It's kind to me, it's kind of similar, and I suppose kind of on some level interconnected with what happened with the fossil fuel companies, right? Because in the 70s and 80s, they knew they had all the info about climate change and the damage it was going to cause, and they could have been like, okay, we'll accept a limit on our, billions and billions and billions on our power. We'll diversify. We'll build, robust renewable energy systems. It won't be as good for us in the short term, but in the long term, will actually allow people to survive. But they doubled down on profit, on short-term goals. So yeah, I mean, as you say, the problem we have now is ideological capture. Like the majority of people are not thinking. They don't think systemically, don't think strategically. They don't put the time in to kind of understand these types of dynamics that we're talking about. I mean, that's what's nice about Substack, is it does seem to be a community of people who are kind of gaining that awareness. But of course, Substack is also owned by Andreessen Horowitz, or they're a major investor. So we don't know how long it'll maintain itself in this independent form. We may be forced to migrate to like Beehive or these other platforms. I mean, which just don't have the same kind of reach. So yeah, I think we have to do what we can. I mean, among the things, I mean, I started this new thing, Coalition for Sanity. We may change the name. We just put out a letter yesterday. I think it's Sanity. I'd love to get you involved. So basically, like, let's see if we can, build a movement. I think now that we're in the state of like global fascism, which they're going to try to take over every country in the same. They're building a model for the world in the same way America's revolution in the 18th century created a model for all the nation states. They're trying to build the next iteration of that, which is just purely corporate AI control. Um, and we need to offer a different model, and we have to do it very strategically and in a clever way, because it cannot be like, oh, we're against you, we're trying to like tear you down. I mean, it's gonna, they have too much power for that with the surveillance and the drones. It has to be more of a symbiotic move, underneath the system. And so, for instance, like I'm thinking of something like a network state for all the people who have like moral values and decency, that has maybe its own social network, its own, where data is protected, where people own their own data, like a separate tech infrastructure that could include also ways to exchange value outside of the corrupt money system. Whereas at this point, if the oligarchs are just issuing the billions to themselves, what is the ultimate value of that money? It's like, let's just innovate, do something else. I mean, if you look at Bitcoin, people are like, oh, Bitcoin is a great alternative. And, it is an alternative. The problem with Bitcoin is that, when it was created, when it was like 2006, 2008, I can't remember. The people who benefited from that were those who were already mainly white, male engineers who, saw the idea and were able to have the technical chops to aggregate that for themselves. So essentially, anybody supporting Bitcoin is supporting an oligarchic system that's as bad as North Korea. As Bitcoin goes up, these people at the top, benefit tremendously. Most of them are also, fully on board with Trump fascism at this point. So, but there's no reason that something else like Bitcoin could not be created that is distributed far more equitably. And also, potentially, I mean, this I don't really know how to do, but it's something I've thought about, brooded on for a long time. We could have different values kind of inscribed in it. Like you actually aggregate it by doing decent things, rather than terrible things. So those are some of my ideas. I mean, I've had these ideas for a while, but yeah, you can respond to any of that. But I also want to talk to you about the energy situation and how energy and climate change are playing a major role in this. So maybe anything in that you want to respond to, or should we go into the energy thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's kind of interlinked anyway. I mean,
Yeah,
I totally support the initiative that you're launching. I think it's we need many more such initiatives. People need to step up. We need to stand up and begin to reach out to each other and find new ways to create new things. I would say that I think it's interesting what the kind of issues you're talking about, because the way that I like to think about how we navigate this moment is recognizing the way that technology and society are mutually constituted. Like human beings are a tool making species. Um, and you can't really reduce anything to something else. There's no such thing as technology is going to save us. But at the same time, you need to, we use tools all the time. What makes us distinct is that we're able to decide how, why, what's the purpose of the tools, what's the context of the tools, who benefits from the tools. I think what's happening now is that we're seeing that, and this is clear from the work that you've done with How Soon Is Now, it's clear with some of the other work that I've been doing. And I have a paper about this called The Planetary Phase Shift. And what I've tried to do is kind of look at how you've got these two intertwined areas, right? If technology and society are essentially, they're mutually constituted, because in a way it's kind of like the way our consciousness works and the way that we work physically are actually, there's actually a wholeness, right? It's not actually separate. We think it's fragmented, but it's not. But that's the problem in our perception. If we then apply that to the way we look at technology, what you see is you've got what these guys represent is a very specific reductionist paradigm. Like it's taking very crude materialist reductionism and fragmentation, and it's taking it to its logical conclusion, right? And it's, everything is externalized, everything is fundamentally materialist. It's like maximalist, consumerist, materialist, extractivist ideology, and everything is separate from everything. And technology is the answer to, and in fact, we are going to become technology. That's the driving thing, is we're all going to become machines, and we'll upload our minds into the cloud, and we'll be turned into a multi-planetary species, and there will be planet-sized IT systems everywhere, and there'll be trillions of us living as robot machines in virtual realities powered by planet-sized computers. And this is the wonderful future that's going to happen. And anything which stands in its way is a catastrophic risk. I mean, that's the lot. They call it long-termism,
yeah.
and it's linked up with the whole effective altruism ideology. And so, welfare state, democracy, liberalism, equality, all the things that normal, ordinary human beings kind of care about are seen as catastrophic risks. So we have to, do anything we can to stop that. So I think there's that, and I
It's
think
it's
so that
it's very much an ends justify the means ideology.
exactly. And I think
Yeah.
what I was shocked by when I wrote my book, Alt Right, was the extent to which that ideology is actually linked with very traditional Nazi eugenics. And you can actually trace the influence of the ideas in the people. And there's a lot of these kind of big, kind of long-termist philosophers like Nick Bostrom from Oxford. He was funded by Elon Musk for his Future Humanity Institute. He created the long-termist manifesto, wrote all this stuff. He basically is a fan of eugenics. Was reading work by Charles Murray. Charles Murray, who wrote The Bell Curve, the Bible of Scientific Racism, which says black people are stupider than white people, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Funded by the Koch brothers, the Heritage Foundation.
funded by the Koch brothers, funded
Yep.
by he also and and all the research for that book was based on stuff that was funded by the Pioneer Fund, which is a Nazi eugenics foundation established in the 1930s in New York and actually had direct ties to Hitler's government. That's the kind of crazy shit that we're talking about, and that's the direction that they're moving in. So in terms of building coalitions and kind of making sure that we have a future, the way I would suggest that we think about that is really there's two elements. One is what are the key technologies that we can use to in a good way. Maybe there's some technologies where they're just we don't want to use those, right? Like fossil fuels. We analyze these things scientifically. We say, you know what, fossil fuels, that's that's old technology. It's industrialized technology. It's destroying the planet. Let's not use that. Let's use clean energy. So, for instance, like with Bitcoin, with blockchain, you can are these are do these technologies have the potential to be used in a good way? But and what comes part and parcel with that is the social organizing system that you use those technologies in. So when you're talking about blockchain, there's good and bad ways of doing it. So I think you're right. Like Bitcoin has been developed in a structure which is the old industrial neoliberal economic paradigm, right? Highly centralized, very hierarchical, free for all. It doesn't distribute the benefits. It's got all of the problems of the these up and down swing cycles of the kind of the stock market, and that's why Bitcoin has been used to massively centralize wealth. Hasn't really actually helped the vast majority of the people on the planet, and that's why the tech bros want to use the blockchain as a tool against us. And I think what we need to be able to do is look at how actually there's really good ways of using these technologies if we organize it in the right way. So that to me is like the challenge that we've got really is what are these technologies that we can use in a good way? How do we optimize and distribute the benefits? And I think you did a lot of work in How Soon Is Now in looking at that, because the vision that you were advocating, which I very much am aligned with, and I've also been talking about, is that there's a possible future of networked, participatory, decentralized, um, kind of high technology society, which actually is regenerative, works within planetary boundaries, and actually helps people to live decent lives and enjoyable lives, fruitful lives, wise lives, where we're able to kind of recognize meaning, find each other, so there's a really there's a future that is there that is still possible. So being able to think really concretely as all of this collapse is happening, but how we almost like an arc, how do we create that kind of arc-like network where we can continue to salvage the best ideas of humanity and actually experiment with them, create them, help each other to really bring these things into the world. Because I think as that system, this system is going into this hardening kind of stage. It's going to get really really bad before it gets better. Um, we don't know what's going to happen, but I think the more that we do this kind of thing, we're kind of increasing the chances that as things fall apart, there is this there's this network which is there, or multiple networks of networks which are operating, which can give people really concrete ideas, experiments, which they can be using in their
Yeah, or
community
or
and
things
people
they
can
can
pick
just
up.
plug in, they can plug into, like here's a mutual aid network or a, resource sharing
Absolutely.
opportunities, um, yeah, I totally agree with what you are saying, and it's great to chat again. And yeah, we should definitely work together on this because all hands on deck right now. Um, yeah, and when I wrote that book, I was very inspired by Oscar Wilde's one political essay, "The Soul of Man Under Socialism," which I think is an incredible read for the moment, because he was basically saying that, if you look at the history, only certain people had the opportunity to become artists, and they were usually the ones who had like trust funds or family wealth. So they were the ones who had the opportunity to cultivate like their unique individuality, and everybody else is kind of crushed under drudgery. and therefore they resent, those people who represent this kind of like freedom and emancipation of consciousness and so on, which we're seeing now with the, I mean, America's always been very anti-intellectual and so on, but I mean, if you could create a technological system that massively reduces intellectual drudgery and even like physical labor drudgery, that could be, more or less a utopian system, because people would be liberated with their time, if they're not starving and beaten and
Yeah.
so on, to
And that's so that's
explore.
what's really exciting about this whole idea of this whole thing with AI.
Yeah,
I think it's really interesting. It's kind of really highlighted this fork in the road, which is like there's one approach which these guys are doing, which is you just basically the whole system is owned and controlled by a tiny minority of people. The rest of us become disenfranchised. It looks like those dystopian movies, right? But the other opportunity is if you redesign the system so that all of us have a stake. And the fact is that we all have a stake in AI because AI has been trained on the
but
intellectual and
everybody's, yeah,
creative ingenuity of the human species.
yeah,
So we should all own and control and benefit from that. And I think if you then can create that network, decentralized approach, then exactly like you said, the the AI by removing because the one barrier to economic productivity is obviously like they talk about labor productivity, like that's the limit. Economists will say that's the fundamental limit. If there's no barrier in terms of labor because you've got your labor costs are literally reduced to zero because AI is able to do most of that drudgery, then that means and if you make sure that in your system everyone is able to benefit from that, then you've opened the door to kind of massive prosperity and massive creative and intellectual possibilities and removed that kind of that drudgery, freed people up to live and express and explore creatively in ways that were literally unthinkable, like just even now it's almost it's really difficult to even fathom something like that. um, and I think what these guys are trying to do actually is they want to stop that, right? I think they are actually worried about the decentralized possibilities of the technologies that are emerging. Like let's go back to the energy question you asked. That fossil fuels are inherently a centralized extractivist technology, right? It's based on a limited resource that is geographically kind of located in specific locations. It requires pretty centralized structures of control. So it tends toward, I mean, it doesn't have to be like that. You could develop ways to distribute the benefits if you wanted to, but it's inherently more hierarchical and centralized. And the way that the whole industrial age paradigm has evolved, the economic system has kind of very much developed around this centralized control of these types of resources. Now, the clean energy system is opening up a new type of possibility space. Again, not saying that that technology by itself is all of the answer or going to save us. There's legitimate debate about, you know, how does that system look? What does it look like? Can you maintain the same levels of consumption? And I think my fundamental view, and I think where there's a consensus, is that that new system is a fundamentally networked and decentralized system, and it's a different type of economy entirely. It's one where you can't have massive, endless amounts of material extractivism. It's a different type of system. But what's really interesting about it is that once you understand how this technology works, and the base of technology is, yeah, of course, you need to manufacture these things, blah blah blah. But once you've created it, you have this endless supply of renewable energy from the sun. It just keeps coming. Solar energy, wind energy, all of this kind of stuff. And the studies that there's been a lot of recent studies looking at this issue, and I think that there is a really strong case which shows that if you roll out clean energy in the right way, there's good ways of doing it and there's bad ways of doing it. But the good ways of doing it can mean that you don't need as much critical minerals, and you can design the system in such a way that it produces kind of like a really good surplus of clean electricity, which can be used to power lots of different things. and to use kind of some of these technological kind of possibilities that we've spoken about, to help recycling and things like that. So I think we're seeing this possibility of a new type of system emerging that could help us solve the problems that we have now under the current system. And the good news is that with the clean energy system, and I mentioned EROI, energy return on investment, this kind of measure, and we're seeing that with the fossil fuel system, that measure of energy efficiency is just plummeting. And some of the studies are really like crazy. Like there was a French study in a very serious journal called Applied Energy that came out a couple of years ago, and they found that by 2050, the fossil fuel system, the oil, specifically oil, would use 50% of the energy that it's creating just to create more and just to get more oil out, which is completely insane. And what these guys are doing is they're externalizing those costs. So they're making tons of money out of the fact that the cost of, as we're going into this scarcity, and the price of the commodity is going up. And so they're making tons of profits of that. But who's getting affected? Everyone, because that is affecting, if the cost of energy then becomes so high, then the cost of everything is going up in the system. The cost of energy, the cost of food, the cost of transport. So we're
Well, I mean,
facing
yeah,
this.
food is also going up because of climate change and
Absolutely.
drought, loss of arable land, flooding. I think England lost 50% of its crop almost last year.
That's right.
And we probably are going to be hitting a danger zone around food supply, in many regions at some point. But
It's
anyway,
very likely. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, look, that and being dependent on fossil fuels means that we are driving this um, exponential increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it looks like 1.5 C is not gonna, that was the safe limit. It looks like that's breached. Most scientists
Oh,
that I've
we're
spoken
we're
to
we're
believe,
we're, we're we're way
yeah,
past that.
that's
Yeah,
done, right?
yeah,
So we have to think about how do we get to a point where we can not only take emissions down to zero, but start taking that carbon out of the atmosphere, which is why one of the reasons why I'm a big advocate of roll out as much clean energy as you can so that you can use some of that clean energy to power new ways of getting carbon out. And also a big advocate of, can we minimize livestock farming, um, and start using some of that land for
I mean,
regenerative agriculture and regenerative natural solutions to draw down carbon at scale.
yeah.
Um,
Why are so many? I guess I know the answer a little bit, but it's interesting to kind of talk about it. Like, Peter Thiel is a chess master. He's obviously a great strategist. I went to this conference that he put on in Miami called Hereticon, and this guy Michael Schellenberger was there, who's a climate change skeptic. Somebody gave a talk about how fossil fuels are actually great and we need more of them. Um, you know, why would somebody that intelligent be kind of denying climate change, fossil fuel effect on the environment? And why are they so? I mean, it feels like yeah, it's or even Musk now, who was Mr. Environmental, we're gonna like fix global warming with electric cars, which was always total bullshit because the cars themselves are massively wasteful to produce and so on. Um, yeah, why are they trapped in this ideological foxhole? Is it just because in the back channels they're so connected with like Exxon and the oil company infrastructure, or is it just as you say that it all ideologically kind of works together, whereas this vision of intense centralization and control is best executed with a kind of fossil fuel infrastructure?
yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I don't have the. I guess I can make a guess, an educated guess, right? Like, I think that it's a combination of those things. I think on the one hand, you have a very powerful incumbent infrastructure lobby, right, around the fossil fuel industries, which knew about climate change and clearly made a decision. And we've now got all the evidence. ExxonMobil, all of these other guys in the 60s and 70s doing scientific research, and they knew that climate change was coming. They warned about it, and then they suppressed it internally, prevented people from knowing. And now all those documents are coming out. So we know that there's a powerful contingent of these guys who are just liars, right? They're just lying to us, lie to themselves because they wanted to keep that system going and make loads of money out of it, and they didn't care. So there is a very, that's what you call evil. There's a very anti-human ideology there. I think what's interesting with these guys, the technology oligarchy, who have kind of evolved out off the back of the fossil fuel oligarchy, and now they're coming up with this new tech. I think they've got a combination of things going on there. Some of them might be in denial, perhaps, kind of self-delusion. But I think a lot of it is about this crisis perception and this belief that they have. I think they've got caught up in this long-termist ideology. They really believe in this technological singularity future. They think that it's inevitable. And that's why you have, Elon Musk and some of the various kind of philosophers that he's been involved in funding. A lot of these guys are reading the same stuff. They have this idea about humanity and the singularity and the way that AI and humans are going to merge. And they have this idea that the only way that we can survive ultimately is for human beings to become a multi-planetary species and a kind of a like a transhumanist multi-planetary species where we've merged with machines and then we've kind of gone into space. That's kind of what they believe. So now, if you think about that,
Or actually, maybe it's even simpler than that, which is if they're, rational. I mean, Thiel plays around with Christian concepts and speaks about the Antichrist and other kind of ideas from Christianity in a very strange kind of way. But if ultimately they're all materialist atheists who believe that death is the annihilation of self, forever, and their main ideology is to sort of win the simulation by attaining immortal life, then they're just driving everything in that direction. So they think that, like, whatever it takes to build artificial superintelligence,
yeah,
that'll then fix the cellular mechanisms, and will and I'm not even convinced that that won't happen. you know my,
yeah,
my, my,
who
my,
knows?
my, my my guess is that's what why Trump just surrendered to Musk. Because Musk was like, look, dude, you're 78, you eat Big Macs all the time, you're going to fucking croak in a couple years, put it all in my hands, get out of the way, and I'll see if I can give you like an immortal, youthful body. No, I'm completely serious. When I went to Hereticon, I met somebody who has a kind of secret company that he wouldn't tell me much about, where they're actually growing human bodies without brains.
Oh my
So,
God.
yeah. So they believe they're very close to not only artificial superintelligence, which may destroy us or may not, but also immortal life in either physical body or digital matrix. So I
Yeah.
think that, yeah,
So I think these ideas converge, right? And I think
yeah,
there's obviously disagreement about like they're not all aligned on everything. But I think one thing that they seem to be converging on is I think they know that this current trajectory means the Earth could be destroyed. So I think that's where it's like, how do you, if that's going to happen, like if the trajectory is destruction, what do you do? So what they're trying to do is essentially the shared ideology is gaslight everyone, confuse the shit out of everyone, so that they're fighting amongst themselves. We're like mired in identity politics and culture wars and all this stuff. Meanwhile, we're going to
yeah.
race towards building out this technology with no regulation because that's the future. That's what we need. Some of them might be like, we have to get off the planet. Some of them might be like, we're going to create immortality here and now. But there's the same kind of idea, right? Like they're not sure, they're not all agreeing on everything, and some people are trying different things. But where they agree is like, yeah, basically, there's a crisis, planet is going to shit. They probably know that climate change is going to get out of control. So how do they protect
Yeah,
themselves and that
we
structure?
we just lost, a big chunk of North Carolina and a big chunk of Los Angeles. So it's that's also obviously why they're planning the takeover of Canada and Greenland. Both for the natural resources and also to relocate whatever segment of the population they consider useful to their plans. Um,
But think about what's weird about it is think about the coalition, right? Like these guys are in coalition with Christian fundamentalists, and that's where it gets really interesting, right? Like, how does it? So you've got clearly people who are clearly like there's some people who are just materialists, atheists. Maybe Peter Thiel does believe in Jesus. Maybe he has a very weird religious, mystical, cultish ideology, and we know that there are these cult elements there, right, as well, like mixed in with this. So I think that's the other thing. Like other people on the outside might look at this and say, well, you know what? If I don't believe in climate change anyway, climate change is not human caused; it's caused by God. You kind of you end up in the same place because it's like, oh, that's not my fault anyway. I can't do anything about
yeah.
that. That's God's will for the earth. So how do we kind of attain this drive towards immortality? Is almost like a kind of resurrection moment that you're
Yeah.
aiming towards, right? And all of the
Well,
apocalyptic stuff is like, oh, well, that's all in the Bible. That's what
yeah.
all the religious scriptures have said. And that I'm really worried about that kind of fusion of insane ideas and, and where that takes you.
Sure. By the way, I got a comment in the chat that I just wanted to comment on from PB Pudinsky. Valuable discussion, but would appreciate it if it stayed on track to how we organize the counterculture to not get driven off the cliffs in the tech oligarchy endgames. So yeah, we are discussing that, Mr. Pudinsky. If you go to the last post I did on Substack, it was reposting this thing from Coalition for Humanity. We ask you to subscribe to that newsletter, and then also if you want to message us directly, we can add you to a group where we're going to look into methods and modalities and actions. But I also think that yeah, we have to be careful here because a lot of the traditional protest ideas or efforts to today there's like a effort to do a financial strike or whatever. I don't know if those are helpful or actually counterproductive at this point, not only because Project 2025 has kind of anticipated all of that, but they want more strife. And there is also an idea which seems to be quite likely that they're that one of the kind of ideas they're operating with is that it's actually kind of a good idea to crash the U.S. economy and destroy the dollar, because if you're a billionaire, or multi-billionaire, that would allow you to pick off, whatever's left that you want, like a private park or whatever looks nice to you, a company, a nice cafe or whatever, and yeah, and so in that sense, they'd be following the shock doctrine, disaster capitalism model, where you engineer a mega crisis and then you profit from it and plunder from it. So I'm afraid that protests that lead to violence, that lead to martial law, or economic strikes that lead to kind of economic crashes and so on, may only be feeding in. So that's why I think there are productive ways to kind of approach the situation, but it's going to require a little bit more of mindset shift around what action means. And as I said before, I don't think it's about and there will be people who go against, and that's part of the ecosystem. But I think also there needs to be an also, or an all that, like what could this be, and can we get people moving in that direction and kind of like embodying, let's say, kind of like a better world, a better approach, and that becomes like a new attractor, along with media, memes, and so on, to yeah, make people more aware of what's underway. You know, like
Yeah,
Nafeez's book, Alt Right, which you can all buy right now and share with your friends and colleagues.
thanks for the plug. I mean, I think that to talk about the value of the book, the reason I wrote it is because I think it tells. It's the only book I think which really explains how and why we got here. A lot of people weren't really expecting the way things have developed. And I think you and I, Daniel, have kind of been worried about this kind of the people who've got their eye on the pulse have been worried about this kind of trajectory. I think we've all been taken by surprise by the speed at which, like you said, it's like we're in a revolutionary moment. It's absolutely
I
unprecedented.
mean, I'm
Um,
not surprised, but I'm shocked.
shocked. Yeah, that's
Because
it.
it's
It's the
like
shock of it.
I kind of expected all this, but now now that it's where it's at, I'm like, well, I guess maybe I have to like leave my nice little cozy apartment in New York and try something else. But um, it also kind of feels though that it's not going to matter where you go. Like this thing has to be confronted, and yeah, but
Well, I think absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, I think it's very important for people to understand that what we're seeing is not isolated to the United States. This is a global project. It's a global project designed to basically remake world order, and that's what, and it's a total realignment, and that's why it's alarming. I think what I see missing at the moment, and that's why the conventional responses from the Democrats and from unions and all of that kind of stuff are going to be limited, is that those guys are thinking that we can just go back to normal, which is like you said, we can just go back. You know, let's just strike, protest, blah blah blah, and then we can go back to something else. It's way gone past that. These guys are tearing things down at a rate at which it will not be possible to go back. That's one thing. Number two, there's no going back because what was before was part of what created this. This is emerged out of what was before. We have to go through. But part of going through is kind of really staring into the face of the abyss, understanding who these people are. And I won't hesitate to say, Elon Musk has been very facetious about doing his Nazi salutes and tweeting out the number 14, the 14 words, a very famous kind of white supremacist neo-Nazi slogan, and kind of signaling white supremacists. And then he'll laugh about it and say, "Oh, you're saying we're all Nazis." We're talking about actual Nazis here. Like we are, that is absolutely probably one of the most shocking things for me when putting the book together was that there is a hardcore movement of Nazi sympathizers here who have not gone away. They've been agitating for decades, and they're now finding new ways to launder their ideology into the mainstream. And Curtis Yarvin, for instance, is one of them. Curtis Yarvin is a reader of scientific racism and someone whose ideas were inspired by that idea. And of course, that comes back to that same thing. If you believe that everything in society can be explained by the fact that it's all the cognitive stratification due to genetics, then of course you're not going to think that we should be investing in system change. You're going to think, no, 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 no. Anyone who calls for that is a threat, actually. Um, so I think understanding when you realize that, you realize there's no going back. So the question then is, I'm not saying that I don't know whether the answer is don't protest, but I think the answer clearly has to be something very distinctive. And I think what's missing from the current response is that it can't just be about, oh, federal workers need to have their rights back. This has to be about how do we remake the system? Because this is not, we're not going to get federal workers just getting their rights back just like that. This is a war. These guys are literally fighting an insurgency against democracy. And I think that's the kind of the initial mindset shift that I think we need to kind of undergo is really recognizing that that's what's taking place, that these guys are literally at war with us. So we need to then think about how do you combat that, because what are they at war with us about? It's a war about the system. They don't want, they want to block off the possibility of a, so far from improving democracy, they want to choke off democratic possibility. What we want to do is not go back to the old failed limited liberal democratic paradigm. We want to deepen and revolutionize true democracy with the tools that we have. And I think that's the thing that is going to get people excited and hopeful. And people who maybe have not, there's going to be a lot of angry people. People like, and it's already started. Like people are federal, ordinary Americans are like, wait a minute, I voted for this guy, and no, Medicaid's getting like, all the stuff that I was relying on, Social Security, all the stuff is being gutted. What the hell's going on? There are people who are coming out on X who are like my I saw another thing like woman was a couple of weeks ago. She was tweeting about how brilliant it is that Elon Musk is going to eliminate corruption and waste. Then she's 3 weeks, like a couple of days ago, she's tagging Elon Musk in posts about how her daughter has been sacked from the federal government. She's been working there for years. She's a hardworking worker. That people are now starting to realize that they don't care about us. So, as much as things are looking grim and they're looking destructive, I think it's really important for us to focus on the possibility of hope. And I think it comes back to some of the other really exciting work that you've been doing, Daniel, on the stuff about the mind and reality and what is reality and how do we actually manifest reality throughout. If reality is consciousness, and I think that the scientific evidence for this is growing more, then this is not just about what these guys want to use all of this stuff to pummel us into despair. They want us to narrow our scope of thinking, because if we're narrow in our scope of thinking and we believe that it's hopeless, then it's hopeless because we've believed that. But if we realize that actually it's all a kind of mind trick, that the way that everything these guys are doing is all based on their ability to literally weaponize bullshit. So
Absolutely.
if we kind of see through that
I
mirage,
mean, as
that
like, as Antonio Negri, the Italian political philosopher, shifted me in some ways. One thing he, noted was that, what is capital ultimately? It's a social relation, right? It's like, the ideology that people have, these billions and billions, they're not like, superheroes. They don't have it in their, it's something that's ascribed to them through a whole set of like cultural parameters and kind of accepted ideologies, and it's basically numbers twirling in virtual systems. So yeah, there's always the possibility that that whole structure can just dissolve. You know, yeah,
yeah, and I think that's the thing. If we realize um that actually we really do have that power, right? Like if we're kind of if we're only envisioning terrible futures that these guys have in
yeah,
mind for us, then that's the attractor, right? But if we can get more people to begin to envision what's actually possible,
yeah,
if then that can be the attractor. And I think in a
yeah,
way that's what is what's unique about the coalition that you're trying to develop. And this, I think, is something really important. Which there's lots of people who are going to do lots of different things, but I think maybe something that can be unique about this is being very intentional about that. That it's not just about the technology. It's not just about the social organizing stuff. It's also about really intentionally envisioning these positive futures and how we create those kind of how do we create attract new attractors that pull people in and help kind of open and kind of break the matrix in a way,
yeah.
help us just to break free of that.
I mean, I think it is obviously the case that these people are very wounded and hurt people. I mean, both Musk and Trump, their fathers were narcissists, so it extends they're narcissistic extensions of narcissistic fathers who probably didn't get proper care and love and so on. So they're always looking for validation. They're incredibly insecure. They're not happy people. They're in this kind of like the whole relationship to women and the feminine is completely broken. It's miserable. It's a miserable state that they're all in. Um, yeah. Um, and then that leads to this very dark dystopian kind of ideology that 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 they're going to get this sort of grim satisfaction from psychosexual sadism and cruelty. Um,
on a
uh,
planetary scale.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, look what's just happened with the. I mean, it's so symbolic. Like Andrew Tate being flown over to the US is like a just a absolute kind of archetype of what you're talking about.
yeah. It has been interesting how, I mean, you have like, I was friends with Russell Brand. Um, in retrospect, I always had suspicions about Russell. I mean, he wrote about me in his book, meeting me in his book Revolution. We did a number of things together. I mean, he called me his friend, but we never really like hung out one on one. It was more like friendship at a distance. Um, I always had this weird suspicion that, and I think he actually, he believed in the leftist ideas, more than he believes in the ones that he's putting out now. But I always felt there was something off about him, and also a narcissist, also the son of a narcissist father. Um, um, but I had another point about that I'm losing for the second. But 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 yeah, I mean, it's kind of I find it a little dispiriting and sad that it just doesn't feel that there are like I don't want to say leftist, like I don't know, humane thinkers that are at the same level of kind of like
Mm.
mass popularity at this point as like the Jordan Petersons. I mean, Russell, I don't know what people think of him, but he still has a large following. Andrew Tate has a massive following. And I don't know if that's just the way the algorithms have worked against us or something. I mean, maybe we're not out there enough. I mean, like I also feel like like people I know who have the right ideas and right values, we don't want to spend 6 hours a day in our basement like Steve Bannon does, raging against the deep state. We want to like smell the flowers and, explore tantra, like read poetry and stuff like that. So it's like, but these guys have kind of their relentlessness has also helped them win. I mean, Musk, is worth $500 billion, but he's like sleeping on the White House floor. Oh, who knows? It's like the drive towards power compulsion when you're like a wounded personality structure that's substituting power for love. I guess that's just such a powerful like it's such a seduction. But I don't know. It just feels like they've won. And also, yeah. I mean, I've been kind of like the counterculture left. We used to sort of have, maybe we never really had it the way we thought we did, rock and roll, like comedy, stand-up comedy, and somehow rebellion, the ideology of like a rebel against the system that was like a left-wing figure like Allen Ginsberg or Timothy Leary, and somehow the right has managed to co-opt all of that energy to the point where, yeah, I don't know what the statement of the other side is that is attractive to like all these like young men, for instance, who are just looking for a better life. So it's like, are you going to go with like, wimpy kind of liberal people who don't really have a plan for the future, or are you going to go for, the Nazi, athletic kickboxing champion, who fucks, a million women a day or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a
It's
really it's a really good point. It's like these guys have kind of very much played on that, and I think what you're speaking about really speaks to the disruption that these guys represent, right? Like they're moving really fast. They move fast. They have massive amounts of wealth, um, and I think we're not really there. Like it's like you said, like who are the cultural icons of the left that you can look up to and say, yeah, those guys are cool. They're doing cool things.
I mean, I
Um,
like Hassan Sabi. Do you know him, the YouTuber?
yeah, I've heard
Um,
of him. Yeah,
yeah, so there's some people from the gaming world who's maybe the best one. Um, um, but yeah, in general, it feels like um, yeah, the progressive world lost its mojo.
yeah,
Um, there's like almost nobody that I look up to. I mean, I watch like David Pakman and Novara Media, but I don't feel like, wow, like I can't wait to see the next thing these guys have to say. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's something we should be thinking about. Like, how do we fill that gap? How do we inspire the next generation? I mean, I think it's something that really I think about a lot is, who is there for young people to get excited about, to be like, actually, I'm going to learn from these guys. And I think it's an opportunity. I think, in a way, we've been caught off guard by the way in which these digital platforms have geared towards elevating particular types of people. Like, I think it's definitely the algorithm, but it's definitely like, that narcissistic, wounded psyche has kind of almost got filtered into the algorithms and then elevated these narcissistic, wounded people. And it's become this thing that, if so
Right.
many of us are wounded, right? And then you're thinking, well, that's the way. Let me just, self maximize. Um, and I
Yeah.
think we need to kind of, we've been caught off guard, but I think we need to be able to be like, okay, well, how do we move forward and present a really confident, inspiring kind of vision of the future? And that's the challenge that we have. And I think a lot of us, it's been challenging because most ordinary people in the world are going through a struggle, right?
Yeah.
Where we've gone through, we've come from wounded backgrounds, we've come from wounded places. Unlike the technology oligarchy, who have used that and created these, the kind of exercised power, and used the kind of that narcissistic energy to kind of just whip their way into further power. A lot of us have actually done a lot of soul searching, a lot of reflection, and I think, that 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 might not seem cool within the kind of conventional paradigm, but actually it's the coolest thing you can do as a human being, is to be able
Yeah.
to confront yourself and, like Luke Skywalker,
Yeah.
and come out the other side and be able to offer hope to the people
Yeah, well,
around you.
for sure that resonates 100% with me because like I got famous in the psychedelic world and I got very addicted maybe to like, opportunities that were like sexual and then then I had to make a whole Me Too confession that I did publicly and asked
I remember,
people for
yeah.
forgiveness and so on. But then it was like there was no forgiveness in the progressive structure. Like everybody still,
Mm,
for years was just like negated me. Like I was never invited back to these different events and conferences and so on. And I was like, look, guys, like what do you want to what do you want to do? You're just gonna like you know cast out people who actually try to make amends and try to speak publicly about it. And so like in the progressive world, men have been completely in a way wrecked because yeah, like if you're in your 50s or 60s, you grew up in a different cultural context. Like when I was in my 20s and 30s, like Harvey Weinstein, like I knew actresses who would like joke about, oh, like I'm going to see Harvey Weinstein, like they knew what was going on. Or people who work for Charlie Rose who were like, yeah, of course he does the interns on, it's like it was just like part of this whole cultural milieu. And then the whole culture turned against that, but didn't give men an out. So like as a progressive man, you were either just annihilated career wise, and you could and you even then you couldn't really talk publicly about the mistakes you made because of the legal repercussions. Your whole security could be taken away, your family could be destroyed, and people who did try to speak out about it got ruined, like Morgan Spurlock, who made Supersize Me. He had like a production company, and he admitted, like I did publicly, that he made a bunch of mistakes. That he never got, as far as I know, he never got to make another film. That he like died of cancer, probably out of being unhappy and so on. So yeah, I mean, I know Mr. Podinsky really wants us to stay on track. So Podinsky, we don't have an answer for you today. Join the newsletter as I mentioned. Oh no, maybe this is the same comment. Oh wow, there's a million more comments. I didn't even notice. Okay, cool. Hi Kate McHugh and Lucianne Rhodes, and nice to see everybody. Okay, anyway, so yeah, you know, I don't know. Like, I mean, I've struggled to figure out how to build back this bridge because also I think it's like, yeah, like on the progressive side, unlike and I've used the progressive. I don't consider myself a progressive. I was a mystical anarchist, but on the side of people who are not for white supremacism, misogyny, and tech fascism, we really should be trying to unite between men and women. Women in an anti-fascist movement have tremendous power because, yeah, they're not going to want to like beat up and kill like tons of women. If they go march, they're much more likely to beat up and kill a lot of men. Women actually have, I think, much more capacity to make shit happen. And also, the regime in the U.S. is really trying to disenfranchise women. I don't know if you heard about. I think it's called the Save Act. So they're introducing this where basically, if your birth certificate has a different name than you bear now, you won't be able to vote. So essentially, every woman who changed her name through marriage will no longer be able to vote. And this completely fits in with Peter
Oh God.
Thiel's stated ideology in the same essay where
Yeah.
he wrote that freedom and democracy are incompatible. He said that we need to take the vote away from women because they tend to vote more liberally, which of course they didn't even do much in the last. I mean, they did to some extent, but not enough. Yeah, we could also, we could go down the rabbit hole of
Mm.
whether the last election, was also fairly educated. First there's the voter suppression of like 3.5 million votes that Greg Palast covered, and then also there's the question of whether Musk was already hacking into the systems. Um, I guess, yeah, another issue around, so I'm just spitballing, so I had a few things here. Going down this line where they've now broken all these laws, what happens in a fascist system is like, for them, there's like no going back, because how could they cede power? Um, you know, they would be, the next executive could use the power against them.
Yeah.
Once
I
again, I
think that's
wonder,
the yeah, that's the biggest. I think that's the biggest kind of signal of there's no going back. It's exactly that. After what these guys have done, like we just had prosecutions of the 6th January insurrectionists, right? People
yeah,
who were white supremacists, neo Nazis, violent thugs, people who committed crimes, and they've now been pardoned.
yeah,
Trump himself was under all of these criminal investigations, charges, convictions. In several cases, should have gone to probably be go to jail. All of that out the window. What will a new government? What does it look like to reverse that? Will these guys let go of power and say it's okay? And I think having Andrew Tate fly over here and get sanctuary amidst the prosecutions that are ongoing against him. The UK government has got live investigations based on witnesses who talked about how a minor, a young girl who was raped anally by Andrew Tate. Is one of the people who's been testifying. Um, and Trump and the administration have just taken this. You complain about immigrants coming and causing crime and rape, and now you've just imported 2 organized crime guys who've been accused of human trafficking and rape on an industrial scale and brought them into the United States. I mean, that's impunity, right? Like that. I think that's what these guys are moving towards is total impunity. Are they going to be able to let go and say, you know what, it's fine, let the democracy work, and come what may, if those guys come in and decide to exert the rule of law, I don't think they're going to do that. so,
they're not
so
going to do
it's
that.
yeah, I don't
They're
think
not
they're
going to
going
do
to do
that.
that. I don't know what they're going to do, but that doesn't seem to me like a viable solution for those guys.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, I
Well,
don't know what's coming. It's scary, right? Like I don't know what are they going to do. Is it going to be like a third term? Is it going to be just truncate democracy? Is
well,
it going
I
to
think at
be
some
I don't know.
point Trump will keel over and die.
Nothing's
Um,
going to happen at some point. Yeah.
I mean, maybe not too far in the future. I mean, there's a guy on Instagram who eats the diet of various political figures for like a few days or a week. And Trump's diet, even for a couple days, nearly killed him. He
Yeah.
gets up in the morning, he drinks Diet Cokes. So he drinks like guzzles like gallons of Diet Coke a day. Um, he eats his snacks are like Fritos, Doritos. He loves Big Macs and Kentucky Fried Chicken,
Yes,
like
that's
big
really
baskets.
insane.
And about the most healthy thing he eats is at his club. He'll have like fried steak with like a little bit of like Roquefort salad, which is basically like lettuce with like sauce on it. And you know, I mean, that can only bring about, first of all, mental deterioration because drinking tons of Diet Coke is going to lead to mental deterioration. But ultimately, yeah, how long can a body live on that?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
these guys
yeah.
do have an almost kind of like supernatural kind of like they really do kind of feel like they're alien implants or something like walk-ons or something. Like if I tried to live on that for like 2 weeks, I think I would just keel over and like throw up and have
It's true.
diarrhea and then
How
like
can you? I don't understand how he's still functioning. It's like insane.
I recommend that Instagram though. It's quite amazing to see this guy just basically almost give up after trying to eat this diet. You know.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I'll check it out.
Well, listen, we've been talking for a long time, and it's been incredibly enjoyable. I feel that you and I are completely in sync here, and I think that we should figure out how we work together more.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so let's have another call. And yeah, I think it's really coming up with a strategy that isn't like overthrow opposition. It's more like symbiosis, like how because these guys are saying they're for free speech, they're for they it's bullshit. Of course, they want free speech for themselves, not for anybody else. But there are contradictions within what they're saying, where you could build something like a sort of symbiotic,
Yeah.
for-profit, network value exchange system that where you can maybe corral people who have decent values and are not haven't lost it, including women in large quantities. That's I think what we need to try to do right now.
Yeah. No, I'm
Yeah.
totally with you.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
So, guys, read Nafeez's book Alt Reich if you want more bad news. Oh, I'm sure there's some good news in there somewhere. Go back to this last post, the Coalition for Sanity. Please subscribe there if you're interested in being part of our little effort in a decentralized kind of movement. You can send us an email. We provide the email on the newsletter. And yeah, any closing thoughts for today?
Closing thoughts. Well, I guess let's close on the idea that we actually have huge amount of power, as there's some people in the comments also mentioned. We do hold the power, but we've been mind fucked into believing we don't hold the power, but we do. So I think we work together to help us recognize our power, to really create new beautiful visions of a world based on compassion, togetherness, and love. I think that can be a new attractor. And I think young people are desperately hungry for this. Um, they're not seeing a positive future. They're being pulled by this vision of dystopia. So yeah, we've got our work cut out for us, guys. But what else is there to do?
And kind of all this is the only game in town right now, I think.
It's the only game in
Um,
town.
okay, Nafeez, let's do this again in a couple weeks. I think if we did it
Definitely.
in my afternoon time in America, we would get a lot. We would get a lot of live people on board. But even so, I think was a great conversation. I'll do my best to get it out there. Yeah,
Brilliant.
yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Ciao, ciao.
Take care,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.
Bye.